Great. Well, welcome back, everyone. Thank you for joining us again for this plenary with Amelia Kegan, who is our Legislative Director for Domestic Policy, and Diana Ohlbaum, who is our Legislative Director for Foreign Policy and Senior Strategist. Amelia and Diana are busy all the time, and recently they've been busy thinking about the elections and what that means for FCNL's work. Now, to be truthful, we've been thinking about the elections all year, just as all of you have been, and wondering what the outcome would mean. And now we have a pretty good idea, although we still have a runoff election in Georgia that could determine who holds the Senate. We probably have a pretty good idea of where things are going. So this, we've talked about earlier, this has been a year of reckoning in so many ways, a global pandemic that has not been well managed at the federal level. Certainly a growing Black Lives Matter movement and a sentiment among an increasing majority of Americans that we need to address this. The ongoing devastation of climate change that people who have suffered through wildfires or hurricanes have experienced directly. Others are seeing it in other ways. And there's a dramatic polarization in the country, and people know that where they live, they know that through their families, but we also see it on the Hill. And so I want to, I laid out kind of a difficult challenge, and we want to talk about that, but we also want to talk about where there is hope. So let me start by just asking each of you, what are the big picture lessons that you draw from the election results as we know them today? And Diana, I'm going to start with you.
Thanks so much, Diane, and welcome everybody. I'm so excited to talk to you about these elections. I would draw three kind of big picture lessons from this. And the first is that votes and participation matter. You saw how many seats are actually still being counted because the margins are so razor thin, as well as the presidential election. And getting out the vote was the huge reason why we have seen this change, even though it wasn't as decisive as we might have liked to see. We've broken all kinds of voter participation records going back to the last century, but still only 2/3 of the people who are eligible to vote did vote. I think the second lesson I would draw is that Americans like to complain about our politics being gridlocked, but then they went and chose a different party to run the Senate from the administration. And I guess there probably is a fear of change that happens too fast. And so people wanted to balance their votes for a Democratic president with a Republican senator. And the third lesson that I would draw is that we have a lot of work to do. We didn't get the wholesale repudiation of Trumpism that so many of us would have liked to see. Nearly half the country either actively supported or was willing to tolerate this racism, misogyny, corruption, bullying, self-dealing, undermining our democracy. And we have a lot of work to do to reverse that. We have to figure out why that is still so appealing to so many people.
We are all going to be thinking about whether you are a Republican, a Democrat, or it's hard to escape the political situation right now. Amelia, what's your sense? What do you take away from the election?
So the election feel like just a continuation of the themes we've seen in 2020, right? So just as COVID, the recession, the protests around police brutality, just as these things really shined a bright light on the underlying systemic issues in our country, for example, the structural problems with our economy, access to healthcare and health equity, and the racism that is so embedded in every facet of our society. The elections too, they really shined a bright light on some of the underlying systemic issues in our democracy. But that's what we do at FCNL, right? We're about systemic change. We go to the root of these issues, knowing that this is a long game effort. When we talk about advancing the world we seek, this is not a fad, this is a calling. And similarly, COVID, the recession, unrest around systemic racism, also, as we've just been talking about, really shined a bright light on how people are living in different realities, right? Those who have access to high-speed internet, who can telework, versus the 11 million people who don't know how they're going to pay their rent or their mortgage next month when we have eviction moratoriums about to expire and a lot of assistance that has expired or soon will expire, right? The huge health disparities that we have seen in regards to COVID, how an encounter with police on a walk home at night is a comfort to some and a life-threatening fear for others. And in that same way, as we've just been talking about, the election results really show how people are living in two different realities. But again, I think FCNL has a really powerful voice here, because when I look at the post-election analysis, I see a lot of people angry because they don't feel listened to or valued. And when we think about the political divisions in our country, who better than those who see that of God in everyone, who recognize the inherent dignity of every person to step into that space, to do as Jesus did and speak truth with love, right? To be real truth tellers, but to do it with love.
Thank you. You know, we talk all the time about the fact that FCNL is nonpartisan, and we are nonpartisan. And in fact, we have seen strong success in getting meetings with both Republicans and Democrats in ways that some of our colleagues don't. How do you see this? How do you see this election and that capacity changing or staying the same as we look forward? And feel free to name that with relation to a specific issue or just generally as you see the organization. Amelia, let's start with you. You're on a roll there a little bit.
Well, I think there are a few things. One is we're going to be looking to the executive branch probably a bit more than we have in the past, right? We've had very little ability to sway the executive branch the past 4 years, and that will probably change. As we've been talking about before, with it being so close in the Senate and with divided Congress, we're going to keep working to advance bipartisan bills, right? We have good relationships with Republican offices, and that's really key. But I think the appropriations process is going to be much more important as well, because if there is more gridlock, the spending bills always get through. And so sometimes that's an avenue that we can get stuff in. There's going to be a lot of attention paid to the senators who are up in 2022 and the moderates. So not just us, but I know a lot of folks will really be focusing on those members. And kind of as Diana said, it is going to be tough. It's going to be a slog. And we've already seen the deficit and austerity narrative coming back, and that's going to play in some of our issues. And it's going to be really hard just to get small wins. But we're going to have to come back right around, say that's not enough, and keep pressing, because that's what we do, right? And then the final thing is, our work shifts, and I know Diana will probably touch on this more, but our work really shifts from a defensive posture to trying to advance policies that really get us closer to the world we seek. And I have found constantly doing that defensive work, especially when it's nonstop in the environment that we have seen, that is draining, that is emotionally draining. And yet at the same time, our system is set up so that it's actually easier to prevent bad stuff from happening oftentimes, especially through the legislative process, than actually enacting good things. So I think emotionally, it's going to be more encouraging. There's going to be positive, kind of trying to get good stuff through. But it's going to be hard, and it's going to take a lot of work, especially given the huge crises and challenges that are before our country right now.
Thanks. How about you, Diana? What's your thoughts about this?
You know, I agree with so much of what Amelia has said. And, you know, starting by, there are some parts of our work that won't change at all. We have always worked across partisan lines. We have always used our moral voice and tried to make the moral case for things. We're going to keep doing that. And we've always sought to bring in constituents around the country to talk to their legislators, because we know that's what works and that's what democracy is about. I also agree with her that there's a little bit of structural change to the way we work, that so much of the last 4 years, we were kind of trying to stop bad things from happening. And now we're going to try to make good things happen, which is really hard, but it's a little more optimistic than feeling like you always have your finger in the dike and you're just trying to stop this avalanche. I guess that's the wrong metaphor, of bad things from happening. But I will say we are actively planning and preparing for the changed policy environments. We've already been meeting regularly, kind of behind the scenes, quietly with the Biden transition team over many months, the senior advisors, including people who may get nominated to cabinet posts. We have been talking to the members who are likely to chair committees in the next Congress to talk about what their priorities are going to be, what they're going to hold hearings on, which kind of legislation they're going to move. And I think one of the benefits we may find, particularly in the foreign policy area, is that we have some new Republican friends. And what I mean by that is when there's a Republican president, many Republican senators and members of Congress are very hesitant about constraining the authorities of that president. And many of the issues that the foreign policy team works on, like ending endless wars, are about stopping the administration from making wars single-handedly. And Republicans who were not willing to do that when there was a Republican president might be very willing to do so when there's a Democratic president. And at the same time, we may find some Democrats who flip as well. So it's going to be a very interesting dynamic.
So, Diana, say a little bit more about the foreign policy arena with Joe Biden as president, given his experience as chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Of course, he chaired the Judiciary Committee as well. And a fact I didn't know, just this will be of interest, and some people who are listening may know this because they've been around FCNL so long, is FCNL gave Joe Biden the Ed Snyder Award back in 2006. And so many people, the people who've been around a long time in Washington know President-elect Biden from when he was Senator Biden. And what's your take on that, experience that he had in the Senate and as vice president? And with foreign leaders, because it's such a dramatic change from President Trump's withdrawal from the world stage.
Thanks. I actually have a feeling that our community will be happier with President Biden's domestic policy than his foreign policy. And I say that having worked on the staff of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee when Senator Biden was the chair of that committee. He is an expert in foreign policy. He has dealt with all these issues for, many, many decades, and he has very well informed and tightly formed views on these things that are really unlikely to change. So we're going to have to do what we can to create a political environment in which he feels supported in doing less militaristic things. I also think that there's a lot of good things that he can and will do right out of the bat. I think he is going to extend the New START treaty for 5 years without any conditions. I think he's going to try to get us back into the Iran nuclear deal. He'll probably put us back into the Paris Climate Accord, although we know we need to go far further than what that provided in order to really address the threats of climate change. He'll enter us back into the World Health Organization and become a much better partner at the UN. I think he will end U.S. support for the Saudi and UAE-led war in Yemen and restore humanitarian assistance both to Yemen and the Palestinians. So there are lots of great things that we're looking forward to, but it doesn't mean he's going to agree with us on everything.
So, Amelia, let me ask you, do you share Diana's sense that we may be stronger on some of the domestic needs, and maybe start with COVID, because that's really something you have been so engaged in for the last 5 months in terms of coming up with a COVID relief package?
I definitely agree. I think if you look at the policies and the things that he's come out with and said, they very much align with a lot of where we are and where we're coming from. I see the biggest problem is there is so much that we want. And while we might have an administration that is sympathetic to the breadth and the scope of what we want to see accomplished, a lot of that stuff has to be done legislatively. And there's going to be a pulling back, or how do you get the votes to get something through? And so there's going to be a real tension about getting the bold action that we really need to address the magnitude of the crises that are before us and getting something over the finish line and enacted. And so that we're going to see that play out. And I think it's really our job to really press that our key priorities are really reflected in what ends up happening. We think about a COVID bill. There are a lot of interests that are trying to get relief, and we have kind of a specific focus on really ensuring that that package is tailored to the needs of those who really need it the most. And there's going to be a lot of competition for that. And I think also we think about a new administration. There is a very limited window of time to get major legislation through. I mean, you've really got 8 months, maybe. Once you get to the August recess, it's midterms already. I mean, people are already talking midterms now. And so what does this administration really decide it's going to put its political capital behind to try and get through? That's a real open question. There's so many priorities. And so that's where our role also is going to be a really important one.
Great. So I want to ask a couple of questions about, we're going to turn soon to talk about grassroots engagement, because that's really one of the strengths of FCNL and it's a strength of this group that we're meeting with today. But Amelia, I want to ask you just about faith-based lobbying. I mean, this election saw a lot of reporting about religion and faith and the candidates, and where they stood on one issue or another, and sort of a split even within the faith community, evangelicals and kind of a left-leaning faith community. What is, FCNL long has been very involved, particularly in domestic policy issues. Ruth Flower led that. You're now leading that work in lots of ways, but give a little bit of a sense about how you see voices from faith communities really weighing in on some of these issues.
I think the faith voice is particularly important right now. As we were talking about the divisions in our country, faith voices have a lot of credibility still and are seen oftentimes as not particularly partisan in many ways and have enormous reach. And that values message, I think, is a really, really strong one. And so I think when people come into offices and lobby from that faith perspective, and when we see faith leaders sort of come together, that can be pretty powerful. And so many of the issues that this country is confronting right now, and those are clearly moral issues. The faith community has a real role to play in speaking to that and kind of helping us decide what direction as a country we go in from here.
So Diana, you've worked, and the lobbyists that work on the foreign policy team have done a lot of work with our advocacy teams, the groups of people in 42 states that take one issue and really focus on it for the duration of a year. What do you, as you look at those advocates and others in the FCNL community, what is your hope for what they might be able to, how they might help, and how has this election changed the way that they might be involved?
Well, I think their involvement has been just so critical to our success on Capitol Hill. I mean, I have to say that the work that the lobbyists do wouldn't be half as effective without having our advocacy teams there, because members need to hear from their own constituents. And just as a little story, when I worked for a senator, there was legislation that I thought was a really good idea and wanted him to co-sponsor, and he agreed. He thought it was good legislation, but he said, I'm not going to do it unless I hear from my constituents. They want to feel that there is that support from the people that they represent. And I have to say, it really doesn't take that many voices. I mean, on foreign policy issues, which I've always worked on, if we got 5 letters on a foreign policy issue, that was a lot for the office. It's different if it's something like taxes or an active war. There may be more communications about that, but just a little bit of involvement from constituents can make a huge difference. And that's why I think the advocacy teams, I hope that we will grow more of them in more districts, because I think there's 2 or 3 states where we don't have any teams yet, and that people won't feel hesitant about reaching out, because actually your representatives and senators want to hear from you, or they ought to, but they actually feel more supported in doing the things they want to do when they hear it from their constituents. So I just think the way that the advocacy teams have to work is to do what they've been doing, but keep doing it more and with confidence that it does matter.
We have, in the time I've been at FCNL, we've really grown our sophistication in working with our grassroots lobbyists around the country. And, Jim Kaysen has helped lead that program, and you both work and your teams work really closely together. One of the additional aspects of that program, a new program that we created a couple years ago, is called the Grasstops Program. And Amelia, I know you've been working a lot with Ashley Wilson, who leads that program at FCNL. Say a little bit about what a Grasstops is, and why is that particularly effective and give us a story about how you've seen it used in the last 3 or 4 months.
Sure, yeah. So the Grasstops program are people who have a relationship with their member of Congress and can get to that office, maybe know the member themselves or someone high up in the office, and can get to them really quickly. And that's super important when especially in moments where we need to get something really to the member, especially quickly, and we can get people to turn around and get a meeting or make a phone call and get that message to the member. And that's really, it really helps us, that line that goes directly to the member, because as Diana said, on foreign policy issues, you might not be getting as much kind of constituent mail on some of that stuff. On some of the domestic issues, you can be getting quite a bit of, offices can be getting quite a bit of constituent mail. And to be able to have those direct meetings with higher senior staffers in an office or to the member themselves, that's huge. That is really, really powerful.
And it's possible.
Can I just...
Yeah, go ahead, please, Diana. Just talk a little bit about that, because I think you've seen how it's grown, how people can grow that relationship.
Yes, and I just wanted to add, this isn't theoretical. We have used this power, and I was thinking of an example where we had a member of Congress who was a co-sponsor of a piece of legislation and was about to pull their name off of it. And we heard about it from our lobbyists. We reached out to the Grasstop, who called the member's office right away. And within 15 minutes, the member had changed their opinion and decided to remain a co-sponsor of that piece of legislation. And we were worried that if they took their name off, it would create this, a snowball effect where others would lose confidence in it. So that's the kind of thing where we work so directly with our Grasstops to really make an impact.
Thanks. That's great. Yeah, there are some great stories. where we've seen both in terms of those direct contacts with the offices as well as media hits. Bill Hobson had one on VAWA, the Violence Against Women Act this week, and we've seen other of our constituents and general committee members be very involved, and we are really grateful for that. We have just about 3 minutes left, I think, or 4 minutes left, and so I want to ask each of you to. We had a question about how can the FCNL network respond, and I think you really covered that. But I want to ask you about where you find hope and what drives you every day, because as Amelia said, on the one hand, as we played defense over the last 4 years, there were days where it just felt like we were slogging through bad news after bad news on immigration and climate change and on Yemen. And so I guess the question is, you are both leaders at FCNL who have a tenacity and a sense of hope. I get to see that all the time. Share your story. What drives you to do this, and where are you finding hope as you look forward to 2021? Amelia, why don't you start?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I love that. I love that question. And of course, I'm a runner, and so I love to use running analogies. And I think of it about how I train all year for a specific race, and really training for that race is building on all my past training and races. And so I do that so that, when race day comes, I can walk up to that start line, I've put in the work, and I am ready, right? And I might want it to be a perfect 55-degree day with the wind at my back. But we don't always get those perfect conditions. And, I look at the days ahead, and we are going to have some days where there's that freezing rain or downpour for 12 hours straight, but we got to run, right? And while some people would have wanted a Democratic Senate, and some people wanted the election results to be a clear rebuke of Trump's rhetoric and policy, these might not be our perfect conditions, but we're walking up to that start line. And I keep having that image in my mind that on January 20th, the race really begins. And we've been preparing for this, right? We know the policies we need to get us towards the world we see. We've been laying the groundwork. And on Tuesday, we're going to do that big time. But our country is really facing enormous challenges. And the politics are tough. There are going to be moments where the wind and the sleet are barreling at our faces. And I go to scripture often, and I love the passage in Hebrews 12, which reads, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us rid ourselves of every burden and sin that clings to us and persevere in running the race that lies before us." And so as you walk up to the start line, I want all of you to remember, you are surrounded by that great cloud of witnesses. We are all walking up there together. And the FCNL staff, we're your crew team, right? We're here to support you in this work. So I have to say, looking at, we have huge challenges before us. Yeah, it's going to be tough, but I am feeling ready. I'm ready for this race. I'm ready for this run. And I'm just grateful to be partners with all of you in this work.
Thank you, Amelia. I love it when you talk about running as your metaphor, because it's so apt. Diana, what about you? What gives you hope and what keeps you going every day?
Well, I feel like I could not improve one word on what Amelia just said. But I'll just sum it up in saying that all of you out there, are what gives me hope. The supportive messages and the enthusiasm and the love and the caring that you show for each other and for us, the staff, and the way that you go into your members with a sense of empathy and respect and persistence and prophecy is very, very powerful. And as long as you're out there, this huge community of people who care and want to make things better, that's my source of hope. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana, and thank you, Amelia, for sharing this plenary discussion. As indicated at the beginning, Diana and Amelia and the teams of lobbyists have been working, planning thinking, designing how they're going to begin approaching the advocacy that they do. And it's already starting. And so when you go to the walk talk or to the lunch with lobbyists, you'll be able to hear a little bit more around a specific issue. And we do hope you will stay very engaged with us, because we do need your advocacy as constituents of members of Congress. I'm going to close this session out by letting you know you're going to get a short break. This has been a very full day. I want to invite you and hope that you would consider joining a worship sharing group, which are going to meet beginning at 5 o'clock. As many of you know, this is a Quaker practice for a time of reflection and speaking to queries. It's open to everyone. And we'll have a link to the small group at the fcnl.org /AM schedule. So please arrive at 5 sharp. It's going to be 8 minutes past when we finish here, so that people can settle and do this. That's an hour long. And then I believe that we have caucus groups still tonight too. And so those are running from 6 to 7. And if you have questions on those, I think you can check with Annie or Alicia. So with that, again, thank you very much for joining us for this session. And we hope you have a good worship sharing, a good caucus group. And we look forward to seeing you tomorrow in our worship session that begins at noon. Good night, everybody. Goodbye, everybody.